And our name was Anum Ansa. Anum Ansa literally suggests that when you drink, it doesn't get finished, or inexhaustible kind of water. Okay. 1482, that's 11 years after the Portuguese had first come in, led by their captain called Don Diego de Azambuja. They came to see the chief of the town called Nana Kwamina Ansa, negotiated for this plot of land and had the castle built. It's on record that the chief was hesitant in giving out the land, citing cultural differences to be a problem in the future. In fact, he went further to suggest that friends will be better friends if they don't live together. But upon persuasions and assurances, he gave in. And that was the first time in the history of the world a West African chief legally transferring the title to a plot of land to an European, and for that matter, Portuguese. Materials that were used in putting up the structure, most of them were imported, with the exception, of course, of water, sand, and stones. Even some stones, I'm told, were brought in, not necessarily to build a castle, but to serve as ballast. In other words, give extra weight to the boats when coming. At the entrance here is one of such stones. Have a look. This is one of such stones the Portuguese brought in. This one here. And on this tour, there are two types of bricks you can easily identify. We have the reddish ones and the yellowish ones. The reddish are Portuguese, yellowish are Dutch. So wherever you see red bricks, you are seeing the Portuguese construction. Where you see yellow, the Dutch construction. Other places, there will be yellow and red at the same place, and that will be recent development. Okay. To the Portuguese, they had two reasons why they built this. One, to trade. Two, give out rooms for the missionaries who were to come in to spread Christianity. And when they came at first, they were Catholics. Before the 1500s, all these rooms on the ground floor were being used as storerooms or warehouses as planned. But then from the 1500s, it shifted from gold and others to human trade. And when it got started, the same storerooms we had were then converted to holding places where the Africans were kept. At the peak of it, the castle was talking of a minimum of 1,000 at a time. 600 of them men, 400 women. And the women were occupying this section of the castle. Okay. I tried to make people understand the Portuguese in the castle never got up one day and said to themselves they were going into slave trading. So at least something brought about it. And before you go into what brought about it, you must also understand that slavery in itself, one form or another, had been with all the races in the time past. And for that reason, the Africans in themselves had an idea before the foreigners came. But then how it was structured in our culture was not the same as they introduced later on. Indeed, the person that will be seen as a slave long before the foreigners came, to a greater extent, ought to be seen as a servant. Because in most cases, that person had rights. He could marry, raise free kids, acquire properties, pay the price on his head, he'll be a free person. It was very difficult in most cases identifying a slave from a free man, because almost same way, he was sheltered, clothed, and fed. One thing that happened to the system that was even unique was the fact that the so-called slave could shift from that status to a royal status. How would that happen? One, when the man proved to have managerial ability or military skill, he could become the caretaker of the master's household. Descendants of such became royals. Women got married into the system. They ceased to be servants or slaves, and from then had royal descendants. Some managed to shift from one community. They began the community for themselves, and by that shift, they all became royals. In Ghana here and now, there are so many chiefs in the various villages, communities, and towns whose ancestors, as a fact, were not royals before, but servants or slaves. And by hard work, marriage, or the shift, descendants all over are chiefs. And partly because of that, it becomes a taboo to refer to anybody as a slave. Three basic ways one could become a servant or a slave before the foreigners came. One, we talk of prisoners of wars. Two, those convicted for some offenses. Three, those who were given out as pawns for debts. Meaning that what? If you go and borrow, the time was due for you to pay. You don't have whatever it is to pay. You could let somebody go and serve. And the period under which the person serves, he or she will be seen to be a servant or a slave. And this was already in the setup before the foreigners came. Okay. Again, I try to let people know that, yes, much as we would agree the Portuguese got here first in 1471, it's not also to say it was the first time they started taking Africans from West Africa. No, they were taking Africans long before they got here. The first time is said to be 1440-41. Some say they had 10, others say they had 12, from a point that later on became known as Rio de Oro. Rio de Oro simply means river of gold. And this place should be somewhere up Senegal thereabout. And to them, they had only one reason for taking the 10 or the 12, serving as a proof that they finally gotten in touch with the people. When they got to Portugal, then the prince saw them and was happy for two reasons. One, somewhere to be educated to serve as interpreters for the Portuguese when they came to West Africa. And two, as they put it, the most intelligent ones to be trained to become missionaries to hasten the spread of Christianity here. But then sadly, when they got settled, they never came back as intended or planned. They rather ended up in the palaces as slaves. And from that time, no other European came and went back without African captives. Making us understand, they started taking Africans 30 years before they first got to Elmina. And 41 years later, this was built. And that's more the reason why most people believe the Portuguese never built the castle only for gold and ivory and others, but also for human trade. Why? Because long before it was built, they were already taking Africans across. But they'll be quick to tell us, those who were taken to Portugal and Spain were not treated the same way as Africans were being treated over here before they came. And as they put it, almost the same. And then the religious ones would also say that, well, by taking the Africans there and making Christians out of us, they were then doing us a favor, because by that, they save our souls and heaven comes in and all that. But everything else changed when the Spaniards got to the so-called new discoveries. And they talk about the fact that not long after going there, silver and gold mines were opened, sugar, tobacco, cotton plantations were established. Yes, they wanted the riches, but not ready to work the hard way. So they subjected the natives to the work. And the story says, Spanish brutalities, overwork, and effects of European diseases decimated the indigenous population. So a man called Bartholomew de las Casas, supposedly a Catholic missionary with sympathy on the natives, suggested for us to be used. One school of thought suggests, he said what he said based on the fact that we're already doing the same work under similar climatic conditions, therefore better substitute. Another school of thought suggests, he even said, we never had souls. And that really got my attention, because not long before this time, we had the souls they wanted to save. And then a few years later, we lost it. How did we lose it? I'm still working on that one. Yeah. But to prove him wrong or right, 1512, 1515, some Africans were first taken from Spain. Some say to Hispaniola, others say to Santo Domingo, where they were tried. And true to the man's word, these ones proved physically fit. In fact, it was proven that one African in strength was to 4 the natives. So demands for Africans then got started. And that actually came as the beginning of what could be described to be the unfortunate transatlantic slave trade. One thing to me very sad when it got started was the fact that in most cases, the Europeans on their own physically could not have gone to all the various places to gather the Africans all by themselves. So broadly, 3 ways came out. 1, the Europeans captured some people themselves. 2, they moved with Africans to gather Africans. And 3, there were some Africans also who gathered people, brought them down to the so-called traders, and from them to the Europeans. Is there one thing that brought in most? Talk of intertribal wars. So the more there were wars, the more there were prisoners of wars, and the more they were exchanged, mostly for weapons. And that's where the Europeans are even accused of masterminding most of these wars. I've come to a point where I tell people that if you could do a diligent study into this story, you'll get to the conclusion that the Europeans were smart in one direction, in the ability to create a society that by itself would produce people without they being involved physically. How? Use Ghana as a case study. Ghana, we have the Asantes, we have the Dangerous, and we have Akwamu people. And supposedly, these were the strong tribes we had. And incidentally, all these were tree-speaking tribes. These ones were fighting with the so-called smaller ones and making them part of them. At the zenith, the Asantes defeated the Dangerous. And Asante with the Danger, Akwamu was never going to be a fight. So I tell people that Ghana could have become a kingdom bigger and larger than today's Ghana, Twi would have been the lingua franca, and Asantehene most assuredly would have been the king. But sadly, during this polling process was when the Europeans came in strong. And what do I mean by coming in strong? They started giving back independence to smaller tribes that have become part of the larger ones. So then the more independent states they created, the more the need came for them to get the weapons to defend themselves. And the only way to get the weapons were to bring in people. So to make it a principle, divide already divided people and heighten insecurity. That will fuel the system. And that's what they did. And that system still plays even in the 21st century. 1637, the locals here were fed up with the Portuguese. Looking for saviors, they saw the saviors in the Dutch. What they saw in them, I still don't know. But they helped the Dutch. They fought the Portuguese, defeated them, and took over. When the Dutch came in, they were not the angels the locals were looking for. They rather extended the structures and took in more slaves. 1807, English came out officially to stop the trade. 1814, the Dutch officially did the same. But those over here buying and selling people never stopped. So from that time, what they called illegal trade got started. At the latter part of it, it was no more profitable. So the 6th of April 1872, the Dutch and the English finally exchanged possessions. The Dutch gave theirs over here to the English, to that of the English, in northern Sumatra, in Indonesia. When the English came in, they used the castle for purely administrative matters. But of course, it doesn't suggest they never took part in the trade. They did. However, at the time, the English were using the Cape Coast Castle for this. During the World War II, they brought men from all English-speaking West Africa, except Liberia, to this place. They trained them here, took them to India and Burma, where they fought for them. And these are the ones we call Royal West African Frontier Forces. After the Second World War, the castle was used as a police training school in 1948. So the English were in control until 1957, when we became an independent state, and we kindly asked them to go back home. So as it stands, the structure is 535 years. The English were in control for the first 100, the Portuguese were in control for the first 155 years. The Dutch were here for 235. English were in this particular one for 85. And Ghana, the last group, 60 years down and still counting. So that's, in a way, a brief history into the background of the place. As we go on with it, if there's any question you have, don't hesitate to ask. Yes, your first question? Yes, sir.
You said the Portuguese were the first ones to basically start this, and then the Dutch came. Was there an agreement between them, like, okay, you get that, you get that?
No, actually, the Dutch fought the Portuguese. With the help of the local people who were thinking that the Dutch were better. Uh-huh. Yes, sir.
Where did the cannibals?
Well, they intentionally put them there. We had 8 of them at the time, and we had chains on each. And they were used to punish the women who were difficult to handle. Yeah. Yeah.
How were they punished with that?
Well, the chains were fitted to the legs and made to stand in the sun or the rain as long as they wanted, no food as punishment. And these ones were those who would resist from the soldiers, not allowing themselves to be sexually abused. Yeah. But the general story actually is that when they came over here to trade, most never brought their women, and they couldn't stay without them. So governors, soldiers, traders kept on abusing the women in the dungeons. But whenever the governor wanted, because of his position, he stood up on the balcony, ordered the women out, and made his choice. The one chosen could have been in the dungeons for a whole month, never cleaned herself, and still the governor wanted. So the soldiers had the responsibility of making sure this woman was washed. How did they do it? They fetched water from the tank, they washed the woman at the center of the courtyard. Women from the dungeons looked on. After the humiliation, she was dressed up, given something to eat, at least to be strong. Then up on the stairs there, we call it private or secret access to the governor's bedroom. Let's have a look.
Come back here. Come back here, Julia, come back.
We're going to this ladder.
Josephine, come here. Come here.
Why are we here?
So this woman chosen, after she had been cleaned out there, was taken up these stairs through a door on top we call a trap door to the governor. After the governor had used it, she was brought back to the dungeons. Instances they would even tell you that before she got back, she could have been used by some other guys also. Very few of them became mistresses and they stayed longer. And those who became pregnant were subsequently freed or liberated. We need to know they came not only from today's Ghana, some came as far back from Nigeria. So when the woman was finally free, she could not go back to where she came from. Secondly, the Europeans never wanted their babies to go anyhow. So some houses were built here in town where those found pregnant were kept. When they delivered, the kids were brought back to the castle and they were educated. But then sadly, most of these ones were educated to be used as a bridge between the Africans and the Europeans. And also they gave out names to their kids. And that was the genesis of the European names along the coast. So now in Elmina, we are still having people calling themselves Da Costa, Da Silva, Devier, Van Ness, Vroom Smith, Hutchison, Peterson, Youngson, Ferguson, Jefferson, Johnson, and all the sons you can think about.
From Mensa to Martinson, but that was purely religious at Latin. They sent them to the convent, and when the parents went after them, they changed their name
Oh, okay.
to Martinson.
Okay.
Some of the Freemans, came from England to this castle
Right.
as a priest from Britain.
Oh, okay.
And established the Methodist Church.
Oh, okay.
Then later went to Accra. No, from here to Cape Coast then to Accra.
Oh,
So,
the
but
Freemans.
married somebody from here called Nsedu.
Insedu, okay. You have a lot of information there.
Her father was
Her father,
Oh, okay. I see. Really
my
cool.
mother from the Nsedu Freeman and my father from Martinson.
Ah, okay. That's beautiful. So this is a personal experience then. Another thing interesting is that Blankson is also original Ghana. Blankson. There's no white man called Blankson. Have you heard of white man called Blankson? He's original Ghana. The guy was Kuntu, and he got to know the English name is Blanket. And so he made his name Blankson. Below the courtyard is a water tank or a cistern. Rainwater was used to fill it. It had 20,000 gallons when full. When the Dutch took over, they wouldn't trust the Portuguese. What if they poisoned us? Are you holding it, please? Somebody holding this guy. Okay. When the Dutch came, they were thinking the Portuguese could poison them, so they stopped using this and had a bigger one built in the main courtyard. But then sadly, when the same Dutch guy who was thinking this could be poisoned picked a woman to be used, then the water to him poisoned became good enough to clean the woman. Now we're not using this also, but it's been proven water in there was not poisoned. They were just scared. Let's come this way. What am I because you? Glory, glory, hallelujah. Normally when people get to this place, the first thing you see them do will be to cover their noses. But I do tell them that no matter how bad the place will smell today, no matter how stuffy it can get other times, it's nothing to be compared to what was happening there. Where we are was the largest of the dungeons for the women. And here you talk of 100 to 150 people at a time. You look at the floor, as hard as it is, they were packed or were sleeping. They gave them food and water once, twice in a day, a very little, just to keep them alive. A month or two, they were held in here and mostly allowed out when the governor was going to pick one to be used. Over here also, they were not allowed to wash down, and women had to go through the menses and yet be sleeping in it. That hole there, among others, was for ventilation. Unfortunately, it was connected to a point they call magazine, where they kept ammunition. So whenever there was any leakage, the fumes or the chemicals came straight to the dungeon and worsened the already bad situation. Here, 2 containers or receptacles were provided. One was placed at the corners where they were expected to go to ease themselves or go to the toilet into them. But they talk about the fact that during the 2nd month, they themselves became too weak, such that some, if not most, were unable to move from where they were to where the containers were to do it into them. So practically, they had everything on the floor, and they were sleeping in it. Meaning that what you see today, some time past, had feces, urine, vomit, menstrual blood, and you seriously cannot underestimate the heat and the stench. And these, among others, explains why they were dying. The question you could ask is, yes, the trade was evil, but if the ultimate was profit, then why let them die? It doesn't make sense. And when you pursue this question, I can tell you for sure, you will never get a definite answer. There will be several suggestions. And 2 common ones you would get would be the fact that, 1, they were too strong to be controlled, so they wanted to be sure at all times they were weak, they couldn't fight back. And to kind of free themselves from the guilt, they developed another mentality, that only those who could survive these were the strong ones who could then work. So it became a kind of a natural process of eliminating the weak ones, and by so doing, they were dying. And those that died were thrown into the sea. As we go on with it, wherever you see bars like this, must let you know that in the past there were bars. Where we see openings like that, we had a door or a gate at the time. But what you see now are not the original ones. And when we get to a point and it's original, I'll point it out to you. Let's please come this way. What's it? Oh, okay. After back to Embaha, after back to Embaha, Abaha, Podama. In July 2015, 48 Africans from all over the world converged in here to do what they called the return of the slaves. By that, they were trying to reenact the story. The first thing they did, they stripped themselves and covered their private parts with these clothes. They put themselves back in chains and they stayed in this dungeon for 12 hours. Now, over the 12-hour period, if anybody felt like going to the bathroom, he had to do it on the floor, just as it happened. But what happened? Over the 12-hour period, nobody went to toilet in the dungeon, no vomit, no menses, of course. They only urinated in the dungeon. And from urine alone, we couldn't stay here the next day for more than 3 minutes, from urine alone. So I began to tell people that no matter how hard anybody will try to communicate the story, we will not be in the position to truly comprehend what they endured. A young lady at a center here said in the middle of the night she found herself wet. So she got up to see what was the problem, only for her to realize some guys wee from the top and it dripped to where she was lying. One brother said to me the next day that the difference between a person in a prison and the one in the dungeon will be the fact that the one in the prison will know why he will be in the prison and possibly when he will step out. But one in the dungeon will not have any idea why he will be in the dungeon and if there's any possibility when he was going to step out. And that thinking was capable of sending a man crazy. Now, what was the reason for the show? The organizer said the Africans may not be in chains physically today, but mentally we could. So all this time he left this door representing knowledge, indicating that with knowledge one could step out of mental slavery. And incidentally, that is what Frederick Douglass said years ago, that knowledge makes a man unfit to be a slave. And there's a general saying that if you want to hide anything from an African, put it in a book, because he will not read. Yes. What they fail to understand is that you can't push a people for 500 years in a particular direction and overnight develop another culture. Yes. So I tell people that we should have had opportunity for reconstruction that was denied. So now African is still finding a rhythm. But anyway, if you're an African and youngster, you must from this castle begin to study or read. Otherwise, you are helping and perpetuating a crime. Okay. In the corner there are original iron bars from the Dutch. And these are such bars that several thousands had held onto, calling for help. You can have a feel of it. You can touch it. It is. The women who had survived all these were put in chains, led down this way to the room there, and from there to the last point in the process, we call it the room of no return. So there they were given out to the boats and they were taken away. These bars were put there not long ago just to avoid accidents. Before there were steps where they descended. But then now, because we are not using the water tank, we've made a drainage over here, so that when it rains, water would collect in and go away. So we do not have the steps here as at this time. From where? So, the whole family could be taken. Brought in here, they were separated. Women were up here, men were down there. All the time in the dungeons, they never saw each other. Most never saw each other again, and that was the end of it. For some few, they could see themselves down there whilst going, but even then, they couldn't talk to themselves. So they kept on crying and crying as they moved on. A child below 10 was, in most cases, put together with an adult and sold together as a person. And those above 10 were sold as individuals. Here, they never had a separate place where kids were kept. So boys were together with men, girls were together with the women. And you can imagine a girl below 10 years in the feces and urine and all that. Most died in here before the ships even came. Okay. Let's see the room of no return.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Were most of the slaves from the Cape Coast, or they were brought from all over Ghana? And if they were, how were they transported here?
They actually,
Who was doing the transporting?
well, they actually walked down to this place. We had the people called the African factors who were bringing them down.
These are Ghanaians.
Well, not necessarily Ghanaians, because we never had Ghana at the time.
These were Africans.
Africans. But when I was talking about the conspiracy thing, were you here?
No.
Okay, let's come. Yes, African. The one that's acoustic.
I know I have seen slave posts from the northern region.
Right.
I've seen some from Bromahafo.
Of course.
And then I think I've seen some from
Asin Manso
upper
also.
part of,
Yes.
the Asin area.
Yeah, but one thing we should actually know is this. When we talk of slavery and trade, no one particular area will be a point where people were taken. I tell people that every tribe was a victim and every tribe will be corporate at the same time. Because, because of the wars. No tribe was actually exonerated from that. Here, all other rooms on the ground floor were dungeons for men. We're talking of 600, of course, more than the women. And then on top all round were residences for soldiers, traders, and pastors. On top of them also we had the deputy governor. And on top of the deputy, we had the governor. So the important the person was perceived to have been, the higher up he lived. When the ships had come, the men were taken from these dungeons to this. So this became known as transit dungeon. And in the transit, some of them were branded. You know branding? They put the stamps in fire. They smear the point they want to mark with oil. Then they'll pick it from the fire and stamp it there. People were dying from the shock or the pain of it. Okay, let's come this way. This hole here and the next one up here were for light and air, for ventilation. And as we come further down, you would have to watch your head and take a step down. Watch your head, take one step down. Come this way. The ladies came down. Up here. No, we had steps at the time. Yeah. 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 And the men came in from this end, and together they got to the room of no return. And that's why I told you they could see themselves and they couldn't talk to each other.
So this is how small the hole they needed to exit to go to the bow.
No, it will take you to another point. There will be another exit. Yeah. Yeah. But at this point, they were not walking as we are walking. They had been put back in chains. And one was chained to the other in the line of 5, 10, 15 sometimes. So you couldn't go faster than the chains will let you go. Meaning that slowly they got to the room of no return. The entrance there is very short, so you compare to bend down. When you bend down, take about 4 steps before you raise your head. We have a very thick wall over there. If you don't count 4 or 5, chances are that you may hit your head. And after warning you, I will not be responsible. Okay, let's keep going. Below. So this was a final point in the process, meaning simply nobody entered this room and went back from here to the boat, and that's it. And what I tell people is that in the life of a captive, life never got better. It only got worse. In other words, every stage will be more severe than the previous stage. Yeah, it was difficult walking down to the castle, yes. But it was better walking down than staying in the dungeons a month or two in your feces and urine and all that. It was brutal in the dungeon, but better in the dungeons than the ships. You know, space could be 25, 30, 35 inches high. People were made to lie side by side, unable to move and unable to sit up. Hands and legs in chains or in shackles. Some defecating, vomiting all over themselves. In instances, one could not get his own hand to clean his own mouth. Many died because of the way they were closely packed. Women were sexually abused, sometimes until death. It was a normal thing for you to wake up to see the person beside you dead. It was regular. You know this man called John Newton, who is accredited with the song Amazing Grace? He was one time into the street and he was describing the interior of a ship, and this is what he said. He said the slaves were chained two and two together. They were laid in two rows, one above the other on each side of the ship. They were close to each other like books on a shelf. He said, I have known them so close, the books on the shelf will not easily contain one more. And I know a white man sent down to arrange them in these rows to the greatest advantage, so that little space as possible be lost. And every morning, more instances than one are seen of the living and the dead chained together. There's another guy called Richard Drake, an Irish American, who said that he saw pregnant women giving birth to babies whilst chained to corpses, because the drunken overseers had not gone in to remove them. When they were into gold and ivory and others, the gate was from this point to this end. When this evil trade started, they narrowed the exit to what you can see for nobody to escape, one person at a time. The narrow nature of the exit, of course, should not deceive us into thinking that probably they never brought fat people. They brought big people. But walking down the distance, so staying here a month or two, by the time they got here, most could fit. The water at the time was touching the castle. Now it has receded. An expert is saying it is just because of the movement of the earth, so that is natural. Meaning right after this, we had steps where they descended in chains to small boats, and the small boats carried them further into the ships. And through this and several others of this nature in Africa, explains why today, Africans as we are, scattered all over the world. If you look all around, you can see these flowers over here. In Ghana, we have a festival called Panafest. And whenever we have Panafest, there's a program under it called Akwaba. Akwaba simply means welcome. So as we welcome everybody to the program, we remember the ancestors. By remembering them, we say all the prayers, and after we lay wreath. Normally we get three, one from the chiefs, one from the government, and one from all Africans in the diaspora. From this time around, anyone who visits and would like to light a candle or lay a wreath in memory of an ancestor is allowed to do so. And that explains why we have more than three here today. And from the time we started laying wreath, I asked people to keep a minute of silence over here in memory of all those who died in the process. And why do I tell them that? I do tell them that those who refused to eat and they died, those who fought and they were killed, those who jumped overboard and killed themselves, did what they did to protest. In other words, they protested with their lives. Those who survived the journey never survived the journey only because they were strong, no. They made up their minds to go through the pain, the shame, the degradation, so they could tell the story. So here you keep a minute of silence in their memory. And after that, you'll be bold enough to say never again. Again, I tell people, don't just say some words, but make a vow in you to do this little thing you can do in your own small way, making sure this evil will never again be repeated. I know we have special guests around, but still keep a minute of silence for these ones. He arrived, but the 12th of March same year he died at the age of 41. This is where he was buried. At the time, A. Andrese was the pastor, and he came from Viera in Zealand. And he wrote something small about the governor text. And what could the pastor say? The governor was just, honest, respectable, and virtuous. But how virtuous he was at the time of slavery, only the pastor could possibly explain. And this is in Old Dutch. Let's come this way. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Yes, sir. From the time all the countries in Africa started getting their independence, everyone had been trying to sort of reconciling the African people all over the world, one way or the other. In the early part of the 1990s, the chiefs here in Ghana took up the responsibility. They had a ceremony here called Fihankra, literally meaning that when you were going, you never had the chance to say goodbye. After the ceremony, they went to the United States, had a long discussions, not only with Africans in America, but all other parts. And when they came back home, this came up. So if there's any reason for walking through the dungeons, it must be in the everlasting memory of the anguish of our ancestors, compelling us to pray for those who died to rest in peace, those who love to return, find their roots, and that man never again be given the chance to commit such crimes against man, and with the living ought to vow to uphold us. So as we step out, we carry the responsibility of doing what we can do in our own small ways, making sure this evil will never again be repeated. There was a time Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said that man's inhumanity to man is not only perpetrated by the vitriolic actions of those who are bad, but they are also perpetrated by vitiating inactions of those who are good. In other words, you cannot sit on the fence and cause a change. You do something little to make change possible. And that something little is what is required of us. And with that, you go to the cell, and don't forget I'll lock you up though.
Are those the original bars?
This is original. And even when you say original, you have to limit it to time. This is original from the Dutch, not the Portuguese.
Okay.
Yeah. Ankato.
Yes, sir.
Ankato, your guest. Okay. Yeah, and Ankato no. Okay. Bibia Desi. Get me the padlocks, please. It's getting serious now. Okay, so you are in a cell.
We have people outside.
We have people outside. Okay.
Jaden. We can't free y'all. Jaden.
Take a picture.
Okay, you all come and hold. Oh, you have a picture. You all come and hold their bars.
The cell you are in was not for the Africans. No, this was for the European soldiers who got drunk and misbehaved. And see, because it was for them, it was well ventilated. Are you enjoying the breeze in there? Yeah. And because it was so nice, no African was put there. And from where you are going to the next cell that has the skull and the crossbones on top. And that would even let you know what happened in the condemned cell. So nobody entered and came out alive. But now that I'm here and I'm a kind one, you are sure of coming back, huh?
Okay, get me out of here.
Take a picture of me.
Get me out of here.
Cheese, baby.
What cell is this?
This is a condemned cell. Oh my God. So my friend will 100 attitude. Join inside? Gonna look you. You good?
There's one small hole.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Free me. Free me. Free me. Free me.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's crazy. Just the slam
something
of
else
the
I
door
want you to
alone.
see.
And this is
There's a condemned cell for those Africans who were fighting for freedom. So the leaders were put in here, no food, no water until death.
Bring them down.
Kill them actually. Kill them. Yeah. But you know what? They were painting these places before. For some time they stopped. Now the paintings, you can see they are falling off, right? But as they fall off, you see the marks under. Can you see some marks over here? Bring it down here and take it to the end. Marks on the wall everywhere. Some say that some of them will mark the days to keep their minds. Others also in times of pain, they can scratch the wall. Yeah. So those ones that are now going straight could be the scratch, and those that are going straight could be the mark. Yeah, keep the marks, yeah.
Guys. So when was this place abandoned?
Was abandoned? No, it was never abandoned. The Peters bought slaves. Mommy, did you hear that?
What is
Okay, did you hear that?
I'm sorry.
Yes, no. I said the pastors themselves, when they were living, they bought slaves to go and sell to make up extra money. They didn't see the trade itself to be evil. The only thing was that they were mitigating the suffering, which they never did. Yeah. This wall here and the next one there were constructed by the Dutch to strengthen the walls of the castle. In 1948, they were using this as a police training school. So they added the pipes on them, and the police were going up and down for training or exercising. And in the middle, we had the church, St. George's Catholic Church. When the Dutch came, they divided this into two. They used the top as a soldiers' mess, where they were eating and drinking, and the down the hall of trade, where the Africans were auctioned or were sold. When the English came, they converted the halls to classrooms. Now it's a museum. Many a times people will question, if you're a Christian, they will question your Christianity because of what happened over here. So I decided to go through the New Testament side of the Bible to see if there were scriptures that could have been exploited. But there is none. So I tell people it is important you separate the book from the acts of the people, because the book never gave a backing to the acts. Never did. Never did. Do you like surprises?
Yeah.
Really? I like that. Okay, come over here for a surprise. The magazine was connected to the female's dungeon. So whenever there was any leakage, the fumes went through. This is the magazine. But now, there is a surprise. Jaden, look up. Don't tell anybody anything. Whatever you see, keep it, because it's a surprise. Okay?
Guys,
Guys,
look
go.
in there. Look in there. It's pretty scary. It's pretty scary.
What did you see? We don't
Guys,
know.
look.
Don't tell anybody about it. Nobody should know.
I just said Batman.
It's you they are waiting for.
Adama. Abasa. Oh.
They are not here.
To shops and the rest, so they migrated to this place. And because they're not doing anything over there, we left them there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. No, me cry. So my colleague will take over from me now.
Creamed, and then this is pushed backwards. And from here also, we could see Cape Coast Castle. That is the last building at the edge. Whilst British were there, Dutch were here. They were enemies, but they managed to get along. And those two rooms you see there, this used to be watch towers during the time of Dutch. But when British took over, these were converted to prisons. And here is where one of the Ashanti king, called Nana Prempeh I, was imprisoned during the colonial period before sent to Seychelles Island in the Indian Ocean for 24 years. Now he was here 4 years, sent to Sierra Leone, 24 years in Seychelles, making 28 years in all.
Did he die in absentia?
No, he came back in 1924, and 7 years later, he died.
How's he die?
Reclaiming airport over there?
Yeah, the water is coming over, so they're making sea defense. Now we move to the other side. Sorry, naturally. I mean, yeah, natural cause. We've changed them. Most of the wood we've changed them. Yeah. All right. Now over here, there is a square diagram. That is a navigational compass put there by Dutch. It also serves as a sundial. The 4 dotted points you see there, this displays the 4 main cardinal points. That's the north, east, and west of the coast. It also serves as a sundial. They put a pole in the middle and they use the shadow to tell time. Now, this moat was filled with water. The bridge over there is a drawbridge. So whenever enemies want to attack, they will raise it. Yeah. Okay. So they will raise the bridge and nobody could get in. I think he's going for a bit, that's why he's